Picture a boy standing at the edge of the Mediterranean. The water is impossibly blue, the kind of blue that makes you understand why ancient peoples invented gods. The sun presses against his skin, not gently, not symbolically, but with physical weight. Heat that demands attention, salt air that burns the back of the throat. This is Albert Camus at 12 years old, standing on an Algerian beach, already learning the philosophy he will not name for another 20 years. He is poor, desperately poor. The kind of poverty that is not romantic or character-building, but simply hard. His father died in the First World War before Albert's first birthday, killed at the Battle of the Marne, a name on a casualty list, a man the boy will never remember. His mother is deaf. Not the poetic silence of contemplation, actual deafness, communication through gestures and half-understood words. His grandmother is stern, volcanic, quick with her hands when the boy misbehaves. There is no money for books, no money for doctors. When tuberculosis colonizes his lungs at 17, no money for the future, everyone tells him he should want. But there is the sea, and there is the sun, and there is the strange, defiant fact that standing here, skinny, sick, fatherless, poor, he feels something that will take him decades to articulate. He feels alive. Not in the inspirational poster sense. Not alive as in hopeful or optimistic, or convinced that things will work out. Alive as in present. Alive as in aware of his own body breathing, his own skin burning, his own lungs pulling in salt air despite the tuberculosis, trying to drown them from the inside. This is where Camus begins. Not in libraries or philosophy departments. Not in the careful arguments of Descartes or the systematic architecture of Kant. He begins in the body, in heat, in thirst, in the physical fact of being a conscious animal on a rock spinning through indifferent space. The Mediterranean will haunt everything he writes. When Meursault pulls the trigger on that beach in The Stranger, it will be because the sun pressed against his skull like a hand. Not metaphor, physical fact. The glare off the Arab's knife, the heat making thought impossible, the body acting because the body could no longer bear not to act. When Camus writes about absurdity, he will not mean cosmic joke or philosophical puzzle. He will mean the gap between human consciousness, which asks why, and the universe's response, which is not hostility or cruelty, but something worse, silence. The blank indifference of the sun, which shines on the just and unjust alike, which gives life and gives skin cancer, which illuminates everything and explains nothing. The Mediterranean taught him that the world is beautiful and meaningless at once, that suffering is real and also serves no purpose, that the body knows things philosophy has not yet found language for. Stand on a beach at noon in North Africa and try to think about ultimate meaning. You cannot. The sun will not let you. Your concerns become immediate. Shade, water, the relief of diving into waves that do not care if you are educated or ignorant, French or Arab, destined for greatness or doomed to die young. This is Camus's first refusal. He refuses to begin with ideas and then apply them to life. He begins with life, hot, bright, physical, indifferent life, and asks what ideas can survive contact with it. Most cannot. Most philosophy, he will come to believe, is the revenge of indoor people against the sun, an attempt to organize reality into systems that feel more orderly than the actual blooming chaos of existence. Philosophers sit in quiet rooms and construct elaborate theories about the good, the true, the beautiful. Then they step outside and the sun burns their carefully constructed categories into vapor. But the boy standing on the beach does not know this yet. He knows only that he has tuberculosis. That tuberculosis will kill him, probably young. That there is no reason for this, no moral logic, no divine plan visible in the X-rays of his damaged lungs. And he knows that despite this, or perhaps because of this, the world is unbearably beautiful. The light on the water, the way the heat makes the air shimmer, the sound of French and Arabic voices mixing on the beach, children from different worlds, playing the same games in the same waves. This is the first paradox that will structure everything Camus writes. Life is unbearable. Life is precious. Both are true, not alternately, simultaneously. He will later call this lucidity, the ability to see clearly without flinching, to acknowledge that your mother will die, that you will die, that everyone you love will die, that the universe shows no sign of caring about any of this, and to choose to live anyway, not because you have been given reasons, not because suffering has been explained or justified or transformed into some secret good, but because you are here, because the sun is hot, because the water is blue, because your lungs, damaged as they are, still pull in air, because consciousness, strange, temporary, unexplained consciousness, is the condition you happen to find yourself in. And if you're going to be conscious, you might as well be conscious fully. Feel the heat, taste the salt, notice the light. This is not optimism. Camus will spend his life arguing against optimism, which he sees as another form of escape, another way of refusing to look directly at what is actually true. Optimism says, it will get better, there is a plan, suffering serves a purpose, justice will prevail. The Mediterranean says, no. The Mediterranean says, this is what you have, this moment, this light, this body, no guarantees, no cosmic insurance policy, no ultimate meaning waiting to be revealed. And Camus, standing there at 12 years old, learns something that will make him both a great philosopher and a lonely one. This is enough. Not because it satisfies all human longings, not because it resolves the problem of suffering or the fear of death, but because it is what is actually available. And there is a strange dignity in accepting what is actually available rather than pining for what can never be. He plays soccer, goalkeeper, the position of last resort, of final defense. He loves it with an intensity that will puzzle people who meet him later as a famous intellectual. How can someone who writes about despair and meaninglessness care so much about a game? But soccer is not a game to him. It is ethics in motion, teamwork without ideology, solidarity without dogma. You defend your goal not because the universe commands it, or because God rewards it, or because history demands it. You defend it because these are your teammates, because this is your position, because the ball is coming and someone has to stop it. Simple, immediate, real. This is what the Mediterranean teaches. Immediacy as an alternative to ideology. The future is not a place you can live. The past is not a place you can return to. All you have is this, the present moment, the actual world, the body breathing, the heart beating. Camus will spend his entire life trying to articulate this without sentimentalizing it, trying to find a philosophy that is neither naive nor cynical, neither stupidly hopeful nor fashionably despairing. A philosophy that can look at a universe that does not care whether you live or die and say, I choose to live anyway, not because I have been given reasons, but because I refuse to let an indifferent universe determine the quality of my response to it. This is rebellion in its first, most basic form, not political rebellion, not yet. That will come later, when fascism and occupation force him to ask what it means to fight for human dignity in a world that seems designed to crush it. But metaphysical rebellion, the refusal to accept that meaninglessness must lead to despair, the insistence that human beings can create value in a universe that provides none, the strange, defiant claim that a life can be worth living, even if it serves no cosmic purpose. The boy on the beach does not have these words yet, but he has the feeling, he has the sun on his skin, he has the blue water in front of him. He has tuberculosis in his lungs and poverty in his pockets, and a future that offers no guarantees. And he has this moment, this one actual, physical, undeniable moment where the light is beautiful and his lungs still work, and the world, terrible, indifferent, magnificent world, continues to exist. He will spend the rest of his short life. He will die at 46 in a car crash, killed instantly, a cosmic joke of absurdity, trying to show others what he learned on that beach. That consciousness is not a curse. That awareness of mortality is not a reason for despair. That the universe's indifference does not have to produce human indifference. That it is possible to live fully, love deeply, work passionately, in a world that will not remember you, in a body that will fail you, in a universe that will outlast every human meaning you create. Not because meaning is guaranteed, but because meaning is yours to make. The sun does not care, but you can. And that difference, that small, fierce human difference, is everything. Section 2, The Stranger's Mourning. Mother died today, or maybe yesterday. I don't know. This is how the world meets Meursault. Not with grief, not with the performance of grief, with honest uncertainty about whether his mother died on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and the acknowledgement that he does not, in this moment, actually know. The world will never forgive him for this. Not for the murder he commits later. Not really. The court will forgive murder if you tell the right story about it, if you claim passion or jealousy or temporary insanity, if you perform remorse convincingly enough. But they will not forgive honesty. They will not forgive a man who attends his mother's funeral without crying, who drinks coffee with milk the next morning, who goes to see a comedy at the cinema, who begins a relationship with a woman named Marie and feels pleasure without guilt. They will not forgive a man who refuses to pretend. Camus wrote The Stranger in 1942, during the Nazi occupation of France, while working for the resistance newspaper Combat. The world was performing the greatest lie of all, claiming that conquest was natural, that domination was just, that some human beings were more human than others. And Camus wrote about a man who could not perform even the smallest social lie. Meursault is not a hero. He is barely a person in the conventional sense. He drifts through his days with a strange passivity, responding to immediate sensations, heat, hunger, desire, without constructing narratives about deeper meaning or long-term purpose. When his girlfriend Marie asks if he loves her, he says probably not. When she asks if he wants to marry her, he says it doesn't matter to him, but they can marry if she wants. When his neighbor Raymond asks for help writing a letter designed to hurt Raymond's girlfriend, Meursault agrees without moral anguish. He does not lack feelings. He enjoys Marie's company. He takes pleasure in swimming, in the texture of food, in the coolness of evening air after a hot day. He experiences the world with vivid sensory intensity. What he lacks is the ability to inflate these immediate experiences into grand narratives about love, duty, moral purpose, cosmic meaning. He lives in the present tense, and the world, our world, the world of courts and churches and social expectations, cannot tolerate this. The murder happens almost accidentally. Meursault is walking on a beach with Raymond. They encounter an Arab man who had fought with Raymond earlier. The sun is unbearable. The heat presses against Meursault's skull. The light reflecting off the Arab's knife creates a blinding glare. Meursault has a gun. He fires once, then, after a pause, and this is crucial, he fires 4 more times into the already dead body. When asked later why he fired those additional shots, he cannot explain. The act seems to emerge from the circumstances rather than from his intentions, as if the sun and the heat and the tension had acted through him rather than he acting deliberately. This is Camus's insight into human action. We are not always the authors of our own behavior. Sometimes we are the site where circumstances meet. Sometimes choice is less conscious decision than physical response to unbearable conditions. But the court needs a different story. The court needs intention, motive, a narrative that makes the murder comprehensible within conventional moral categories. And Meursault cannot provide this. So the prosecution constructs a different case entirely. They focus on his behavior at his mother's funeral. The fact that he did not cry. The fact that he could not remember if his mother was 50 or 60 years old. The fact that he drank coffee with milk and smoked a cigarette while sitting with her body. They argue that anyone who could attend his mother's funeral without showing proper emotion is capable of any crime. The murder becomes almost secondary. What is really on trial is Meursault's refusal to perform the social rituals that make other people comfortable. He is condemned not for what he did, but for who he is, or rather for who he refuses to pretend to be. Camus shows us something terrifying here. Society punishes authenticity more severely than it punishes violence. If Meursault had cried at the funeral, if he had claimed he killed the Arab in a fit of passion or jealousy, if he had expressed remorse using the correct emotional vocabulary, he might have received a lighter sentence. But his honesty, his refusal to perform emotions he does not feel or claim motivations that would make his actions comprehensible, marks him as fundamentally alien. The prosecutor calls him Monsieur Antichrist. And in a sense, he is right, not because Meursault is evil, but because he represents everything that conventional morality cannot assimilate. He is the man who will not lie, who will not construct false narratives, who will not pretend that his actions serve purposes they do not serve. He is what the human animal looks like when stripped of social performance. And we find this unbearable. In prison, awaiting execution, Meursault is visited by a chaplain who tries to get him to turn to God, to find meaning in his suffering, to prepare for an afterlife that will make sense of his earthly existence. Meursault refuses, not quietly, not politely, with surprising passion. He grabs the chaplain by the collar and shouts that he does not want false hope, that he has accepted the absurdity of his situation, that he would rather face death without consolation than live with beliefs he knows are false. This is the moment when Meursault becomes fully conscious. Throughout the novel, he has lived with a kind of animal immediacy, responding to sensations without reflection. But here, facing death, he achieves what Camus calls lucidity, the clear-eyed recognition of his situation, without illusion or escape. He understands that the universe is indifferent to his individual existence, that his life has no cosmic significance, that his death will change nothing important about the world, and he accepts this, more than accepts it. He opens himself to what he calls the benign indifference of the universe. Benign, not hostile, not cruel, simply indifferent. The universe does not hate him, it does not love him, it simply does not care. And in this recognition, Meursault finds a strange kind of peace. He is free to appreciate the simple fact that he has lived, that he has experienced consciousness and sensation and relationship, even if briefly and without lasting consequence. In the novel's final lines, he hopes that there will be many spectators at his execution, and that they will greet him with cries of hate. This might seem like masochism or despair, but Camus means something else. Meursault wants the crowd's hatred because it will confirm that he remained himself until the end, that he refused to perform repentance or embrace false consolations, that he maintained his honesty even when honesty guaranteed his death. He wants to die as he lived without pretense. The Stranger is not a celebration of amorality or indifference to suffering. Meursault is not a model for how to live. His passivity, his failure to engage deeply with other people, his inability to construct meaning even where meaning might be possible, these are limitations, not virtues. But he does something crucial. He reveals the lie at the heart of conventional morality. The lie that says we act from clear motives, that our behavior serves purposes we understand, that we are always the conscious authors of our own actions. The lie that says proper social performance, crying at funerals, using the right emotional vocabulary, constructing acceptable narratives about our behavior, is the same thing as genuine feeling or authentic moral engagement. Meursault shows us what happens when someone refuses to perform, and the violence of society's response reveals how much our social order depends on constant, unacknowledged dishonesty. We are all, in some sense, strangers to ourselves. We act for reasons we do not fully understand. We are moved by forces we do not acknowledge. We construct narratives about our behavior after the fact, stories that make us comprehensible to ourselves and others. Meursault simply stops constructing these stories, and for this, not for the murder, but for the honesty, he must die. Camus is asking, what would it mean to live without lies? Not without kindness, not without connection, not without love or loyalty or moral commitment, but without the false narratives we construct to make our existence seem more meaningful, more coherent, more justified than it actually is. Could we bear it? Most of us cannot. Most of us need the story more than we need the truth. We need to believe that our mother's death means something, that our actions serve purposes, that our suffering is not arbitrary, that we are not simply conscious animals responding to heat and hunger and desire on a rock spinning through indifferent space. Meursault can bear it, and this makes him not quite human in the eyes of the court, but it also makes him the only truly honest person in the novel. Everyone else is performing, playing roles, following scripts, constructing narratives that make their lives feel meaningful. Only Meursault refuses. Only Meursault lives in the present tense, responding to what is actually happening rather than to stories about what should be happening. Only Meursault faces the sun directly, and the sun blinds him, overwhelms him, makes thought impossible, reduces him to immediate physical response. This is what the world looks like without the comforting filters of narrative and meaning. Bright, hot, beautiful, indifferent, unbearable, and precious at once. Camus called Meursault the only Christ we deserve, not because he is good, but because he is honest about what crucifies him, not sin, not moral failure, but the simple refusal to lie about the human condition. There is one question that matters more than all others. Not what is the meaning of life, not does God exist, not what happens after death. The question is simpler and more terrible. Should I kill myself? Camus begins his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, with this declaration: there is only one really serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Everything else, epistemology, ethics, metaphysics, the careful arguments about truth and goodness and being, all of it becomes secondary if we cannot answer the fundamental question of whether life is worth living. This is not morbid fascination. This is radical honesty. If you truly believed that life was meaningless, that your actions served no purpose, that suffering was arbitrary and death erased everything, would you continue? Most philosophy tries to avoid this question by providing reasons to live. God loves you. History has a plan for you. Your suffering serves a higher purpose. Justice will prevail. Meaning exists if you look hard enough. Camus refuses these consolations. He looks directly at what he calls the absurd, the gap between human need for meaning and the universe's silence, and asks, given this, why not suicide? The question is not rhetorical. It is the knife edge on which his entire philosophy balances. Suicide would be one response, a logical response even. If life truly lacks ultimate meaning, if the universe truly does not care whether you exist, if death truly erases all your accomplishments and relationships, then why endure? Why push the boulder up the mountain when you know it will roll back down? Why get out of bed when you know you will just have to get back in it tonight? Why love people who will die? Why create things that will be forgotten? Why struggle when struggle leads nowhere permanent? These are not abstract questions. These are the questions that strike you at 3 in the morning when you cannot sleep, when the structures that usually hold your life together, work, relationships, routines, goals, suddenly seem arbitrary and strange. When you step outside the flow of daily life and see it from a distance, and it looks like a play you no longer remember agreeing to perform in. Camus calls this moment the feeling of absurdity. It can arrive anywhere, in the middle of a successful career, in a happy relationship. On a beautiful day you are brushing your teeth and suddenly the action seems bizarre. You have brushed your teeth thousands of times. You will brush them thousands more, and then you will die, and it will not have mattered whether your teeth were clean. You are at work and realize that you spend most of your waking life doing things you do not care about, to earn money to support a life you barely have time to live. You are with people you love and realize that all of this, the warmth, the laughter, the intimacy, is temporary, that everyone at this table will eventually be gone, that the universe will continue exactly as it did before any of you existed. This recognition is what Camus means by absurdity. Not that life is silly or ridiculous, but that there is a fundamental mismatch between what we want, understanding, purpose, permanence, and what the world offers, silence, indifference, mortality. We are creatures who ask why, in a universe that has no capacity to answer. And once you have recognized this mismatch clearly, you face a choice. The first option is physical suicide. Simply end the consciousness that recognizes absurdity. If the gap between human need and cosmic silence is unbearable, eliminate the human side of the equation. This is logical. But Camus argues it is also a form of surrender. Suicide says, I cannot bear this tension, so I will eliminate myself rather than learn to live within it. It treats absurdity as a problem that needs solving rather than a condition that can be inhabited. It gives up on the very thing that makes us distinctively human, our capacity to be conscious of our situation and to respond to it with dignity and defiance. The second option is what Camus calls philosophical suicide, the leap into faith or ideology that promises to resolve the tension. This is the move that says, the universe seems meaningless, but I will believe in God anyway, or I will believe in historical progress, or I will believe in some cosmic order that my reason cannot grasp, but that faith can access. Philosophical suicide is more common than physical suicide. Most people, when faced with absurdity, reach for some form of meaning-making that goes beyond what evidence actually supports. They join religions, they embrace political ideologies, they construct elaborate theories about the universe that make their individual lives seem significant. And Camus understands why. Living without ultimate meaning is difficult. It requires strength. Most of us do not have most of the time. But he argues that philosophical suicide is dishonest. It uses reason to recognize the limits of reason, then abandons reason when those limits become uncomfortable. It acknowledges absurdity, and then immediately tries to escape it through beliefs that cannot be rationally justified. It wants the comfort of meaning without earning that meaning through lived experience and authentic choice. The third option, the one Camus advocates, is revolt. Not violent rebellion, not angry protest against the universe, but the quiet, persistent refusal to accept defeat at the hands of absurdity. Revolt says, I recognize that life has no ultimate meaning. I accept that the universe is indifferent to my existence. I acknowledge that death will erase everything I accomplish, and I choose to live anyway. More than that, I choose to live fully, passionately, with complete engagement. Precisely because there is no cosmic purpose to fulfill, I am free to create my own purposes. Precisely because no external authority validates my choices, I am responsible for making choices worth making. Precisely because nothing lasts forever, every moment becomes precious in its temporariness. This is where Sisyphus enters, the Greek king condemned by the gods to push a boulder up a mountain for all eternity. Every time he reaches the summit, the boulder rolls back down. Every time he must begin again. On the surface, this is a story about futility and punishment. But Camus sees something else. He sees a figure who continues despite knowing his task is meaningless, who does not expect the boulder to stay at the top, who has abandoned hope for ultimate victory, but has not abandoned effort. Sisyphus knows exactly what awaits him: more struggle, more temporary success, more inevitable failure. He harbors no illusions, and yet he continues. Why not? Because he has been given reasons. The gods certainly have not provided justification for his punishment, but because in the act of pushing the boulder in the engagement itself, in the full commitment to a task he knows is futile, he discovers something that transcends futility. He discovers that he is more than his circumstances, that consciousness, even condemned consciousness, has a dignity that rocks and mountains and even gods cannot touch, that there is a strange freedom in accepting the worst and choosing to continue anyway. Camus writes, the struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy, not despite his punishment, not in ignorance of his situation, but precisely because he has seen through all illusions and chosen engagement over despair. This is not the happiness of achievement or success, not the happiness that comes from getting what you want or accomplishing your goals. This is the happiness of someone who has stopped waiting for external validation and has learned to find satisfaction in the quality of their own response to whatever reality presents. The happiness of full presence, complete honesty, authentic choice. You are Sisyphus. Your boulder is whatever you do every day that must be done again tomorrow. Your job, your relationships, your body's needs, the maintenance of consciousness itself. You wake up, you work, you eat, you sleep, you wake up again, you build things that will decay, you love people who will leave or die, you create meanings that the universe will not remember. From one angle, this is tragedy. From another, it is liberation. If nothing you do has ultimate cosmic significance, then you are free to choose what has immediate human significance. If no external authority will tell you what your life should mean, then you must take responsibility for creating meaning through your choices and commitments. If death erases everything eventually, then the only moment that truly matters is this one, right now, right here, in the actual world you actually inhabit. Revolt is not optimism. Camus spends considerable time distinguishing his position from hope. Hope believes things will get better. Hope believes there is a plan. Hope believes suffering serves a purpose. Revolt believes none of these things. Revolt says, things may not get better. There may be no plan. Suffering may serve no purpose whatsoever. And still I will engage. Still I will choose. Still I will live as fully as I can with the time I have been given. This is harder than hope, darker than optimism, more honest than faith. It requires looking directly at the worst truths about existence and refusing to let those truths determine the quality of your response. It means accepting that you are a temporary consciousness in an indifferent universe and deciding that this consciousness, limited, mortal, unexplained, is precious anyway, not because it serves a higher purpose, but because it is yours, because you are here, because the alternative to engagement is surrender. And Camus will not surrender. He will not kill himself. He will not leap into false consolations. He will push his boulder, fully aware that it will roll back down, fully committed to pushing it anyway. Because the act of pushing, when done with complete lucidity, when chosen freely despite full knowledge of futility, becomes its own justification. You do not need the boulder to stay at the top. You need only to be fully present in the pushing. This is the answer to the question of suicide. Not because life has been proven meaningful, not because suffering has been explained, not because death has been defeated, but because consciousness, strange, temporary, absurd consciousness, is capable of a response that transcends its circumstances, capable of defiance, dignity, choice, capable of saying yes to life even when life offers no guarantees. One must imagine Sisyphus happy, and one must imagine yourself waking up tomorrow to push the same boulder you pushed today, capable of the same strange joy. The word absurd has been misunderstood for so long that it has become almost useless. People hear absurd and think silly, ridiculous, laughable, like a comedy sketch or a surrealist painting, something that makes no sense and therefore deserves mockery or dismissal. But when Camus uses the word, he means something precise and devastating. He means the collision between two facts that cannot be reconciled. The first fact, you are a creature who craves explanation, meaning purpose. You want to know why you exist, what you should do, whether your life matters. This is not optional. It is built into consciousness itself. To be aware is to ask questions. To be human is to search for significance. The second fact, the universe offers no answers, not cruel answers, not disappointing answers, no answers at all. Just silence. The blank indifference of stars burning millions of miles away, caring nothing for your questions, your suffering, your brief flicker of awareness. The absurd is what happens when these two facts meet. It is not in you. It is not in the world. It is in the relationship between you and the world, the gap that opens when human need encounters cosmic silence. Imagine calling out into a canyon and hearing nothing back, not even an echo, just the sound of your own voice disappearing into space. That is absurdity, and once you recognize it clearly, once you see that the universe will never answer your questions, that meaning will never arrive from outside, that suffering serves no cosmic purpose, you face a choice that will determine everything about how you live. Most people never make this choice consciously. They live in what Camus calls bad faith, accepting ready-made meanings without examining whether those meanings are true. They inherit purposes from family, culture, religion, ideology. They follow scripts written by others and call this living. But some people, through crisis or insight or simply paying attention, glimpse the absurd directly, and in that moment everything changes. You're standing at a wedding reception, music playing, people dancing, The bride and groom radiant with hope for a future that statistics suggest will include struggle, disappointment, possible divorce, and certain death. From one angle, this is tragedy. Why celebrate? Why make promises you cannot keep? Why build a life together when time will dismantle it? From another angle, this is the only sane response to existence. Precisely because nothing lasts, the moments matter. Precisely because promises cannot be guaranteed, the act of promising becomes precious. Precisely because the universe offers no validation, human choices become the only source of meaning. The absurd wedding is this: marrying life itself. Committing to existence despite full knowledge that existence offers no security, no ultimate purpose, no happy ending guaranteed. It is choosing to dance at a party you know will end, and Camus argues that this choice, this marriage to the absurd, is not resignation or despair but liberation. You are no longer waiting for life to justify itself. You are no longer asking the universe for permission to care about things. You are no longer postponing engagement until you receive answers to questions that have no answers. You are here. The music is playing. Someone you love is asking you to dance. That is enough, not because it satisfies every longing, not because it resolves the mystery of existence, but because it is what is actually available in the actual moment you're actually living. This is what Camus means by lucidity: clear-eyed recognition of exactly where you are, no illusions about ultimate meaning, no false hope about cosmic justice, no pretense that suffering will be explained or that death can be defeated. Just honest acknowledgement you are temporary consciousness on a temporary planet in a universe that will outlast every human meaning you create. And within that acknowledgement, not despite it, but within it, the possibility of joy. Not the joy that comes from achievement or success, not the joy that depends on things working out according to plan, but the joy of full presence, complete engagement, the strange satisfaction of being entirely yourself in circumstances that cannot guarantee you anything except this moment. Think of Sisyphus again, but this time pay attention to what happens during the walk back down the mountain. The boulder has rolled away, the task he just completed has been undone. He faces exactly what he faced before: more struggle, more temporary success, more inevitable failure. This is the moment of consciousness, the pause between efforts, and Camus insists we must imagine him happy here. Not happy because he has forgotten his punishment, not happy because he believes the gods will relent, not happy because he has constructed some elaborate philosophical justification for his situation, happy because he has accepted what is actually true, that his labour is futile, and chosen to labour anyway. Happy because he is no longer fighting against reality, but fully inhabiting it. Happy because in that walk back down the mountain, he is completely himself, no pretense, no performance, no waiting for external validation, just a man walking down a mountain to push a boulder back up it. And in that simple act, freely chosen despite full knowledge of its futility, a kind of dignity that rocks and mountains and even gods cannot touch. You are walking down the mountain right now. Whatever you accomplished yesterday has already begun to decay. Whatever you build today will need to be rebuilt tomorrow. Whatever meaning you create will not outlast your consciousness to appreciate it. This is not pessimism, this is description. And the question is, knowing this, how will you walk? Will you walk in resentment, angry that the universe does not validate your efforts? Will you walk in despair, convinced that futility makes engagement pointless? Or will you walk in what Camus calls revolt, the quiet refusal to let circumstances determine the quality of your response? Revolt is not violence, not rage, not even protest in the conventional sense. Revolt is the fundamental human no to defeat, the insistence that even though the universe is indifferent, you are not. Even though meaning is not provided, you can create it. Even though death is inevitable, life can still be chosen. This no contains within itself a yes. No to despair, yes to engagement, no to false hope, yes to honest commitment, no to cosmic validation, yes to human dignity. The absurd marriage means accepting life on its actual terms, temporary, unexplained, unguaranteed, and choosing it anyway, Not choosing it because you have been convinced it will all make sense eventually. Not choosing it because you believe suffering is secretly good or death is an illusion. Choosing it because you refuse to let an indifferent universe have the final word about the quality of your existence. You cannot control whether your life matters cosmically, but you can control whether you live it fully while you have it. You cannot prevent death from erasing your accomplishments, but you can create accomplishments worth erasing. You cannot make the universe care about you, but you can care about yourself, about others, about beauty and truth and justice, and that caring, unexplained and unvalidated, is its own justification. This is the wisdom Camus found on that Algerian beach as a boy. The sun does not care, but you can notice how the light hits the water. You can feel the heat on your skin. You can taste the salt. You can be present in your own life rather than waiting for your life to become something other than what it is. Most of us spend years, decades, even entire lives waiting for circumstances to improve, waiting for clarity to arrive, waiting for someone to tell us what we should do, waiting for the universe to provide the meaning it will never provide. And while we wait, life happens. The music plays. People dance. Opportunities for connection pass by. Moments that could have been precious slip away unnoticed. The absurd marriage says, stop waiting. The universe will not give you permission to live. God will not appear with instructions. History will not reveal its grand plan. Death will not grant you extra time to finally start engaging. You are here now. The wedding is happening now. The invitation is now. Will you dance or will you stand against the wall demanding to know why there is music in a universe that will eventually fall silent? Camus danced, despite tuberculosis, despite poverty, despite the occupation of his country by fascists, despite witnessing friends tortured and killed, despite living through a war that demonstrated human beings' capacity for systematic cruelty on an unprecedented scale. He wrote novels, he worked for the resistance, he fell in love, he played soccer, he swam in the Mediterranean. He argued passionately about ideas he knew could not be proven absolutely true. He lived as if life mattered, knowing full well that from a cosmic perspective it did not. This is the paradox at the heart of absurdism. Life does not have inherent meaning, therefore you are free to create meaning. Death will erase everything, therefore everything you do before death becomes precious in its temporariness. The universe is indifferent, therefore your refusal to be indifferent is the only source of value. This is not a comfortable philosophy. It offers no final consolation, no promise that everything will work out, no guarantee that your suffering serves a purpose or that justice will eventually prevail. It offers something harder and more honest, the invitation to live without illusions, to see clearly that you are standing at an absurd wedding, celebrating a union between consciousness and existence that makes no ultimate sense, and to celebrate anyway, to marry life, to commit to presence, to choose engagement over escape, not because you have been given reasons, but because you are creating reasons through the very act of choosing. The absurd is not something to solve or escape. It is the permanent condition of human existence, the gap between what we want and what we get, between our questions and the universe's silence. But within that gap, within that impossible space between human need and cosmic indifference, there is room for something beautiful, the freedom to create, the dignity to choose, the capacity to care deeply about things that do not matter ultimately but matter immediately, humanly. Really, the music is playing, your life is happening, the wedding has already begun. You can refuse the invitation, you can demand different terms, you can wait for meaning to arrive from somewhere outside yourself, or you can dance. There is a difference between rebellion and revolution that most people never learn. It is the difference between saying no to injustice and saying yes to utopia. The difference between fighting for human dignity and fighting for historical destiny. The difference between changing what can be changed and destroying everything in pursuit of perfect transformation. Camus spent years trying to articulate this distinction, trying to show that you could oppose oppression without becoming oppressive, that you could fight for justice without claiming perfect knowledge of what justice requires, that you could rebel against the world as it is without promising to create a world as it should be. This was not a popular position. The 1940s and 50s were dominated by totalizing ideologies, fascism, communism, various forms of revolutionary politics that promised complete solutions to human problems. You were expected to choose a side, to commit yourself fully to a grand historical narrative, to accept that the end justified the means, that present suffering was necessary for future paradise, that individual human beings could be sacrificed for collective salvation. Camus refused, not because he lacked commitment to justice. He had fought in the resistance. He had risked his life opposing fascism. He knew what it meant to stand against tyranny when standing meant risking everything. But he had also seen what happened when revolutionaries gained power. He had watched the Russian Revolution promise liberation and deliver gulags. He had seen how movements that began with genuine concern for human suffering transformed into machines that created new suffering on an industrial scale. He had observed the terrible logic by which people who claimed to love humanity became willing to murder actual human beings for the sake of abstract principles. And he asked, what if the problem is not just bad revolutionaries, but revolution itself? What if there is something in the very structure of revolutionary thinking that leads inevitably to tyranny? Revolution begins with a refusal. Someone looks at the world and says, this is intolerable. So far, this is identical to rebellion, but then revolution adds something else. It says, and I know how to fix it completely, not improve it, not make it more humane, fix it, transform it, create something entirely new that will eliminate the sources of suffering and injustice that plague human existence. This requires certainty, perfect knowledge of what human beings need, complete understanding of historical forces, absolute confidence that your vision of the future is correct, and this certainty becomes dangerous. Because once you believe you know the ultimate shape of justice, once you convince yourself that history is on your side, once you commit to a vision of perfect society, then anything that stands in the way of that vision becomes expendable. People who oppose your revolution are not just wrong, they are obstacles to human liberation, enemies of progress, impediments to the inevitable march of history, and obstacles can be removed. This is how revolutionaries who begin by loving humanity end by killing humans. This is how movements for justice become engines of terror. This is how the dream of perfect society produces nightmare states. Camus saw this pattern repeat across the 20th century. Different ideologies, different promises, same terrible logic. And he said, there must be another way. Rebellion, in his understanding, begins the same way revolution does, with refusal, with the recognition that certain conditions are intolerable and must be opposed. When a slave finally says no to their master, they are not simply being difficult or disobedient. They are asserting something fundamental, that there are limits beyond which human beings should not be pushed, that they have dignity that deserves respect, that their nature cannot be indefinitely suppressed. This no contains within itself an implicit yes, a yes to human dignity, a yes to rights that should not be violated, a yes to values that transcend the particular situation. But, and this is crucial, the rebel does not claim to know how to create a perfect world where such violations never happen. They simply know that this particular violation, right here, right now, cannot be accepted. The rebel works within limits. They recognize that human knowledge is imperfect, that unintended consequences follow even well-intentioned actions, that perfect solutions to human problems do not exist. They understand that improving conditions is possible, but eliminating all suffering is not, that reducing injustice is achievable, but creating perfect justice is beyond human capacity. This humility keeps rebellion connected to actual human experience. The rebel remembers that they are fighting for real people in real situations, not for abstract principles or theoretical futures. They maintain concern for means, not just ends. They refuse to sacrifice present human beings for the sake of future perfection. The revolutionary loses this connection. Intoxicated by visions of total transformation, they begin to see current conditions not as problems to be ameliorated, but as obstacles to be eliminated entirely. They start treating individual humans not as ends in themselves, but as means to achieving their grand vision. They become willing to kill in the name of life, to oppress in the name of freedom, to destroy in the name of creation. And they justify this by appealing to historical necessity, the greater good, the inevitable march toward utopia. Camus calls this logical murder, killing actual human beings in the name of abstract principles, and he argues that it is always wrong. Not because violence is never justified. Sometimes violence is necessary to resist greater violence. Sometimes force is required to protect the defenseless. But violence should be used reluctantly, sparingly, with full awareness of its moral cost. The person who uses violence in a good cause should feel the weight of that violence, should accept personal responsibility for it, should acknowledge that they are doing something terrible for the sake of preventing something worse. They should not justify their actions by appealing to historical necessity or revolutionary logic, should not claim that the end makes the means disappear, should not pretend that killing becomes noble when done for the right reasons. They should remain human, fallible, aware of their own capacity for error and self-deception. It fights injustice without claiming perfect knowledge of justice. It opposes oppression without promising to eliminate oppression entirely. It works for human dignity without requiring cosmic validation for that work. It chooses to remain human rather than become gods, to work within limits rather than try to transcend them completely. Camus found his model for this kind of rebellion in unexpected places. Not in successful revolutionaries who seized power and implemented their visions, but in people who maintained moral constraints even while using violence. The Russian revolutionaries of the early 20th century, who assassinated government officials but refused to harm innocent bystanders, who accepted that they would be executed for their actions rather than claiming that their cause justified any means, who maintained scruples even while committing what they considered necessary political murder. They never claimed that their vision of the future erased the moral weight of their present actions. They limited their violence, accepted personal responsibility for it, understood that they were doing something that required payment, their own lives in exchange for the lives they took. This is rebellion that remembers it is human, that recognizes limits, that maintains connection to the values it claims to serve. Compare this to revolutionaries who justified unlimited violence in pursuit of perfect society, who created categories of people, class enemies, counter-revolutionaries, wreckers, who could be killed without moral concern, who claimed that historical necessity absolved them of normal moral constraints. These revolutionaries lost sight of the human values that had motivated their rebellion in the first place. They became what they fought against. This is the trap Camus wants to help us avoid. How do you fight injustice without becoming unjust? How do you oppose oppression without becoming oppressive? How do you work for a better world without sacrificing the people who actually exist in the present world? The answer is limits. Accepting that you cannot create paradise, that perfect solutions do not exist, that your knowledge is incomplete and your methods are fallible. Working to improve conditions without promising to transform human nature entirely. Fighting specific injustices without claiming to eliminate injustice as such. Maintaining moral constraints even when those constraints make success more difficult. Choosing to remain within the human condition rather than trying to escape it through revolutionary transcendence. This is harder than revolution. Revolution offers the comfort of certainty, the satisfaction of complete commitment, the sense that you are part of something larger than yourself that will vindicate your sacrifices. Rebellion offers none of these consolations. It asks you to fight without guarantees, to oppose injustice without perfect knowledge of justice, to work for change while accepting that change will always be partial, imperfect, subject to reversal. It requires living with uncertainty, but it also preserves your humanity, because when you accept limits, you remain connected to the actual world and the actual people in it. You cannot treat humans as raw material for your utopian vision because you have acknowledged that you do not possess utopian knowledge. You cannot justify unlimited means because you have accepted that the means become part of the ends. You cannot become a fanatic because you have admitted that your understanding is incomplete. This is the path Camus walked, fighting for justice without claiming to know its ultimate shape, opposing tyranny without promising to eliminate it entirely, working for human dignity, while accepting that dignity is always fragile, always threatened, always requiring defense, never surrendering to injustice, but also never surrendering to the totalizing ideologies that promise to solve injustice through total transformation, remaining in the difficult middle ground between passive acceptance and revolutionary fanaticism. This made him lonely. The left accused him of betraying the cause, of being too cautious, of letting abstract moral concerns interfere with necessary political action. The right saw him as dangerous. As someone undermining traditional authority and social order, he belonged to no camp fully, but he believed this independence was necessary, that intellectuals had a responsibility to maintain their critical distance, to refuse to become propagandists for any movement, to speak truth even when truth was inconvenient for all sides. The rebel does not choose between competing ideologies. The rebel chooses human dignity over ideology itself, and that choice, difficult, lonely, offering no final consolation, is the only way to fight for justice, without becoming one more source of injustice in a world that already has too many. The city of Oran does not know it is dying. Not yet. First come the rats, crawling from sewers into sunlight, staggering across streets, dying in doorways, thousands of them, their small bodies piling up in corners, in gutters in the courtyards where children play. The authorities say it is a temporary sanitation issue, nothing to worry about. These things happen. Then the first human falls ill, then the 10th, then the 100th. By the time the word plague is spoken aloud, and it takes weeks for anyone to say it, because who wants to name a medieval horror in a modern city? The gates have already closed. Quarantine, the city sealed. Everyone inside trapped with the thing that is killing them. This is how catastrophe arrives. Not with warning, not with preparation, not with time to become the person you wish you were before crisis. Demands that you become someone. It simply arrives. And you must respond with whoever you actually are. Camus wrote The Plague in 1947, 2 years after the liberation of France. Everyone knew what the plague represented: the Nazi occupation, fascism spreading like disease through Europe, the way ordinary life continued even as horror became normalized. The choice every person faced: resist, collaborate, or pretend nothing unusual was happening. But the novel works as more than allegory. It works as direct examination of how human beings behave when confronted with suffering they did not cause and cannot fully prevent. What do you do when the world becomes unbearable and you cannot escape? Dr. Bernard Rieux is the novel's quiet center. A physician, married but separated, his wife is in a sanatorium, dying of her own illness, unreachable behind the quarantine. He does not believe in God, does not believe in ultimate meaning, does not believe the plague serves any cosmic purpose, or that fighting it will earn him heavenly reward. He simply does his job. Every day he visits the sick, treats symptoms he knows will likely kill them anyway, records deaths in careful detail, organizes sanitation teams, distributes medicine. That is never enough. He works without hope of victory and without surrender to defeat. This is Camus's vision of heroism. Not the hero who saves the city through extraordinary action, but the person who continues ordinary work under extraordinary circumstances, who maintains human dignity when everything conspires to destroy it. Rieux does not fight the plague because he believes he can defeat it. Epidemics follow their own cycles. They burn through populations, and then, for reasons that have little to do with human intervention, they end. He fights because fighting is the appropriate human response to unnecessary suffering. Because even if he cannot save everyone, he can ease pain for some. Because even if the plague will eventually end on its own, the people dying today deserve care today. Because consciousness, human consciousness, moral consciousness, requires engagement, even when engagement seems futile. The plague creates a strange equality. Rich and poor breathe the same infected air. Educated and uneducated face the same death. Social hierarchies that seemed permanent dissolve when everyone becomes equally vulnerable. And in this forced democracy of suffering, people discover who they actually are. Some hoard supplies, some profiteer from others' fear. Some retreat into private obsessions, like Grand the clerk, who spends the entire epidemic rewriting the first sentence of a novel he will never finish. But others discover reserves of courage and generosity they did not know they possessed. Taru, the visitor trapped in Oran when the quarantine begins, organizes volunteer sanitation teams. He has no medical training, no official authority, just the conviction that when people are dying, those who can help should help. He and Rieux become friends. Late at night, after exhausting days treating the sick, they talk about what it means to be a decent person in an indecent world. Taru confesses that he has spent his life trying to become what he calls a saint without God. Someone who acts morally not because heaven rewards virtue or hell punishes vice, but simply because moral action is the only response that makes sense to him. He does not claim to have succeeded. He knows his own capacity for cruelty, his own complicity in systems that harm others. He knows that no one achieves perfect innocence, but he keeps trying anyway, keeps working to reduce suffering, even though suffering cannot be eliminated, keeps choosing solidarity, even though solidarity offers no guarantees. This is what the plague teaches. You do not need ultimate answers to take moral action. You do not need to solve the problem of evil to oppose specific evils. You do not need cosmic purpose to care for the person dying in front of you. Even Rambert, the journalist who spends most of the novel trying to escape the city, trying to return to the woman he loves in Paris, eventually abandons his escape plans and joins the sanitation teams. Not because he stops wanting to leave, not because he suddenly believes the city's suffering is more important than his personal happiness, but because he realizes that while the plague continues, the question is not "what do I want?" but "what does this moment require?" And this moment requires that people who can help actually help. The plague also reveals the lie of false hope. Father Panelou, a Jesuit priest, delivers a sermon early in the epidemic, telling his congregation that the plague is God's punishment for their sins, that if they repent and accept God's will, they will find meaning in their suffering. It is a comforting story. It makes the plague comprehensible, gives suffering a purpose, offers a script for how to respond. But then Panelou witnesses a child dying in agony, watches the small body convulsed with pain, sees Rieux fighting desperately to save a life that God, if Panelou's theology is correct, has decided to take, and something breaks in him. His second sermon is different, more tentative, more honest about mystery, less certain that human beings can understand divine purposes or that suffering serves obvious moral lessons. He still has faith, but it is no longer the confident faith that explains everything. It is the darker faith that accepts what cannot be explained. When Panelou himself falls ill, he refuses medical treatment, not dramatically, not as protest, simply lies in bed and dies, as if accepting what he cannot understand. Rieux sees this as another form of surrender, another way of abandoning responsibility for maintaining human life and dignity in the face of forces that threaten both. The doctor and the priest represent two responses to absurd suffering. The priest seeks meaning, the doctor seeks to reduce harm. The priest tries to reconcile suffering with divine purpose. The doctor simply fights suffering without needing it to mean anything beyond itself. And Camus sides with the doctor, not because religious faith is always wrong, but because the immediate ethical demand, ease pain, save lives, maintain human dignity, does not require theological justification. You do not need to understand why the plague exists to know that you should help the people dying from it. The plague eventually ends, not because of human intervention, not because the sanitation teams defeated it or the doctors cured it. It simply runs its course, the way epidemics do. The city celebrates, gates open, separated lovers reunite, life returns to something like normal. But Rieux knows better than to believe this is permanent victory. The bacillus that causes plague never dies. It waits in furniture, in linen, in dark rooms. It can remain dormant for decades. And one day it will send its rats back into a city to teach human beings another lesson in mortality and solidarity. This is not pessimism. This is realism. Suffering is not a problem to be solved once and for all. It is a permanent feature of conscious existence. Disease will return. Injustice will resurface in new forms. Catastrophe will arrive without warning. The question is not how to prevent all future suffering. The question is how to respond when suffering arrives, with denial and escape, with false explanations that make tragedy seem meaningful, with resignation that accepts horror as inevitable, or with the quiet persistence of Dr. Rieux, who works without illusions and without despair, who helps because helping is what consciousness demands of itself. The plague teaches solidarity, not the abstract solidarity of political slogans, but the lived solidarity of people trapped in the same crisis, breathing the same infected air, facing the same mortality. You discover in catastrophe that your fate is bound to the fate of strangers, that the disease killing them can kill you, that their suffering diminishes the world you share. And if you pay attention, you discover something else, that this has always been true. The plague simply makes visible what was already the case, that we are fragile, that we are mortal, that we depend on each other in ways we usually forget, that consciousness is not an individual possession, but a collective condition, that the appropriate response to this condition is not hope, which often becomes a way of avoiding present responsibility by appealing to future salvation, but engagement, showing up, doing the work, caring for the sick, organizing sanitation, recording deaths honestly, maintaining human connection when isolation threatens to make everyone strangers. This is what Camus means by resistance, not the dramatic resistance of armed rebellion, though he knew that too from his time in the French resistance during the occupation, but the daily resistance of continuing to act humanely in circumstances that make humanity difficult, the resistance of Dr. Rieux, who treats patients knowing most will die, who keeps careful records knowing the numbers will be unbearable, who maintains professional standards when chaos would excuse sloppiness, the resistance of Tarot, who volunteers for dangerous work without expecting recognition or reward, the resistance of Grand, who continues rewriting his sentence even as the city burns, because maintaining your small private project in the face of catastrophe is itself a kind of defiance. The plague will end, and it will return. This is the rhythm of existence: crisis and calm, suffering and relief, catastrophe and recovery. What matters is not whether you can prevent the next plague. What matters is who you become while the current one rages. Do you hoard or share? Do you flee or stay? Do you retreat into private concerns or recognize that your concerns are bound to everyone else's? Do you demand meaning before you act? Or do you act because action is what the moment requires? Dr. Rieux chooses action, without hope, without despair, without needing the universe to validate his choice. He simply does what seems necessary. And in that necessity, in the daily work of reducing harm, easing pain, maintaining dignity, he finds something that transcends necessity. He finds what it means to be human when everything conspires to make you less than human. And when the gates finally open, when the plague retreats and the city celebrates, he does not celebrate with them. He goes home, writes his account, bears witness to what happened. Because someone must remember, someone must record, someone must tell the truth about what catastrophe reveals and what resistance requires. Not so we can prevent all future plagues, but so we remember what is possible even when everything seems impossible. That solidarity can emerge from shared suffering. That dignity can survive catastrophe. That consciousness can choose engagement over escape. That even in the darkest circumstances, some people will choose to help rather than hide. And that choice, small, ordinary, repeated daily without fanfare, is everything. Amsterdam is a city built on circles. Concentric canals ring the center like Dante's vision of hell, each level deeper than the last, each a little farther from solid ground. Water beneath everything, fog obscuring the distances, bridges connecting one uncertainty to another. This is where Jean-Baptiste Clements comes to confess, not to a priest, not to God, to strangers in bars, to anyone who will listen as he peels away the layers of his former life, revealing the rot beneath what appeared to be virtue. The Fall is Camus's darkest book, his most unsettling. the one that shows what happens when lucidity curdles into cynicism, when honesty becomes a weapon, when the recognition of absurdity leads not to defiant engagement, but to sophisticated bad faith. Clemens was once everything society rewards: a successful Parisian lawyer, defender of the poor and oppressed, champion of noble causes, a man who cultivated his own goodness like a garden, tending it carefully, enjoying the admiration it produced. He saw himself as morally superior, not crudely, not obviously, but in the quiet satisfaction of knowing he was better than the people around him, who did not care about justice, who did not sacrifice for others, who did not carry the weight of moral awareness he carried. His goodness made him feel good, and this, he will come to understand, was the problem. The crisis arrives on a bridge over the Seine late at night. A young woman standing at the railing, her back to him. He walks past, hears a splash, hears a cry. She has jumped, and Clemens does not jump in after her. He tells himself it is too late. The water is too cold. He probably could not save her anyway. These are reasonable thoughts, practical thoughts, but he knows immediately with terrible clarity that the real reason is simpler. He did not want to risk himself. In the moment that mattered, when his carefully constructed identity as a moral person faced actual moral demand, he chose safety over action, and this recognition begins to unravel everything. He starts seeing self-interest everywhere in his past. Actions he had interpreted as generous now appear manipulative. Relationships he had understood as loving now seem transactional. His entire moral identity, the thing he was most proud of, reveals itself as performance. He had not been good. He had been playing the role of good person, enjoying the rewards that role provided, the admiration, the sense of superiority, the feeling of being better than others. Even his sacrifices for others, he realizes, were partly sacrifices for himself. They made him feel virtuous. They confirmed his self-image. They allowed him to look down on people who were less morally aware. His altruism was a form of narcissism. This recognition could have led to genuine transformation, to humility, to the difficult work of trying to act morally despite awareness of mixed motives. But Clemens chooses a different path. He becomes what he calls a judge penitent, someone who confesses his own sins as a way of judging everyone else. He moves to Amsterdam, city of circles, city of fog, city where everything is uncertain, and begins telling his story in bars, to strangers, to anyone who will listen. He describes his fall from moral certainty with such unflinching honesty that his listeners feel compelled to examine their own lives, to recognize their own mixed motives, to see their own selfishness hiding beneath their virtuous acts. His confession becomes an accusation. By revealing his own moral failures so completely, he creates a context where everyone else's moral failures become visible. By admitting he is not good, he demonstrates that no one is good. By showing that even his most noble actions were contaminated by self-interest, he suggests that all noble actions are contaminated. His humility becomes a form of pride. His self-criticism becomes a way of claiming superiority over people who are less honest about their limitations. He confesses his sins so he can judge others without being judged himself. This is sophisticated bad faith. Camus showing us how even the recognition of absurdity can become corrupted, how lucidity can transform into cynicism, how honesty can become a weapon. Clemens has learned enough about human nature to become disillusioned, but not enough to become compassionate. He has seen through moral pretensions. But instead of accepting this as the starting point for genuine ethical engagement, he uses it as an excuse to abandon ethics entirely. He has recognized that perfect virtue is impossible, and he concludes that therefore all attempts at virtue are equally worthless. This is the trap Camus wants to show us. The absurd can lead to revolt, the defiant insistence on creating meaning despite meaninglessness, or it can lead to what Clemens represents, the sophisticated nihilism that uses knowledge of human weakness as permission to stop trying. Clemens's strategy is brilliant in its way. By confessing everything, he becomes invulnerable to moral criticism. You cannot accuse him of pride, because he has already admitted his pride. You cannot call him a hypocrite, because he has already revealed his hypocrisy. He wears his moral failures like armor, and he uses this armor to attack. Every time he confesses his own sins, he is implicitly accusing his listener of the same sins. Every time he reveals his own selfishness, he is suggesting that all apparent altruism is secretly selfish. He creates a world where genuine goodness becomes impossible because he has shown that even the appearance of goodness masks self-interest. And in this world, he is king, not because he is good, but because he is honest about not being good. And this honesty, this refusal to pretend, gives him a kind of superiority over people who still pretend to moral decency. This is what happens when lucidity becomes an end in itself rather than a beginning, when seeing clearly becomes more important than acting decently, when honesty about human limitation becomes an excuse for not trying to transcend those limitations. Camus has learned that we are all fallen, that moral purity is impossible, that self-interest contaminates even our best actions. These recognitions are true, but he concludes that therefore we should embrace our fallenness, accept it, even celebrate it by exposing it in others. He has mistaken diagnosis for cure. The woman on the bridge haunts him. Her cry echoes through the canals of Amsterdam, through the fog, through every conversation he has. She is the moment when his self-image shattered, the moment when he faced actual moral demand and failed. He could have responded to this failure by trying to do better, by accepting that moral action is difficult and requires constant effort and often fails but is still worth attempting. Instead, he responded by abandoning the possibility of moral action entirely. If I cannot be perfectly good, he concludes, then I will be perfectly honest about being not good, and this honesty will be my new form of superiority. Camus is diagnosing a spiritual illness, the disease of those who have seen through illusions but have not found their way to authentic engagement on the other side of disillusionment. Camus is what happens when the absurd hero becomes cynical, when Sisyphus decides that since his boulder will roll back down anyway, the act of pushing it is meaningless, when the recognition that life lacks ultimate purpose becomes an excuse for not committing to immediate purposes. The fall is Camus interrogating his own philosophy, asking, what if lucidity is not enough? What if seeing clearly leads not to defiant joy, but to sophisticated despair? What if the person who refuses all illusions also refuses all commitments? This is the danger at the heart of absurdism. The risk that honesty about meaninglessness will lead to paralysis or cynicism rather than engagement. Camus represents this danger embodied. He is brilliant, self-aware, psychologically acute. He sees through himself and others with precision, but all this seeing has not made him better. It has made him harder, more isolated, more willing to use his insights as weapons. He has learned to live without illusions, but he has not learned to live without love. And without love, without genuine connection to other human beings, without care that extends beyond self-interest, lucidity becomes a kind of death. You can see everything clearly and still be completely lost. The canals of Amsterdam circle endlessly, water beneath the streets, fog obscuring the distances, Camus walking from bar to bar, telling his story, peeling away his masks, revealing his rot, and finding in this revelation not transformation but stasis, not movement towards something better but endless circling of the same truths about human weakness. He is stuck, trapped in his own fall, unable to rise because he has convinced himself that rising is impossible, that everyone who appears to rise is secretly falling too, that all virtue is performance, that all love is manipulation, that all sacrifice is narcissism. These may be partially true, probably are partially true, but they are not the whole truth. And when you make them the whole truth, you cut yourself off from the possibility of genuine human connection. You become like Camus, brilliant, honest, self-aware, and completely alone, circling the canals of your own cynicism, confessing your sins as a way of avoiding the harder work of trying to live better, despite knowing you will never be perfect. This is Camus's warning, his recognition that his own philosophy contains dangers, that the absurd can liberate or it can paralyze, that lucidity can lead to engagement or to sophisticated withdrawal, that seeing through everything is not the same as understanding anything. Camus is the anti-Rieux. Where Rieux responds to absurdity by working without hope or despair, Camus responds by abandoning work entirely. Where Rieux maintains human connection despite knowing it is temporary, Camus uses the temporariness of connection to justify isolation. Where Rieux creates meaning through engagement, Camus destroys meaning through exposure. The Fall shows us what we risk becoming if we are not careful, if we let honesty curdle into cynicism, if we let awareness of human weakness become permission to stop trying, if we let the recognition of absurdity justify abandonment rather than inspire revolt. Camus has fallen, and he has made his fall permanent by refusing to try to rise. He tells himself, this is honesty, that he is simply seeing clearly while others live in illusion, but really it is another form of escape, another way of avoiding the difficult work of being human in an absurd world. The work of caring despite knowing everything ends. The work of trying to be decent despite knowing perfect decency is impossible. The work of loving despite knowing loss is inevitable. This work requires more than lucidity. It requires courage, generosity, the willingness to commit to things that cannot be rationally justified. Camus has lucidity without courage, and so he circles the canals, confessing, judging, revealing, never rising, never choosing, never engaging, just falling endlessly in a city built on water where nothing is solid and the fog never lifts. There are friendships that carry the weight of ideas, where what connects two people is not just affection but a shared vision of what matters, where conversations become collaborations, where disagreements sharpen thinking rather than damage connection. Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre had this kind of friendship. For years, they were the twin pillars of French intellectual life. The two men who seemed to define what it meant to think seriously about freedom, responsibility, human dignity in the ruins of post-war Europe. They met in 1943 during the occupation. Two writers working for the resistance. Two philosophers trying to articulate what it meant to remain human when humanity itself seemed under siege. They published each other's work, defended each other's ideas, appeared together at cafes and lectures. When people thought of existentialism, though Camus would reject that label, they thought of these two men as partners in a shared project, but underneath the friendship something was fracturing. They disagreed about communism, about the Soviet Union, about whether revolutionary violence could be justified by appeals to historical necessity. Sartre believed you had to choose sides, that neutrality was impossible in a world divided between capitalism and communism, that intellectuals had a responsibility to support revolutionary movements even when those movements used troubling methods. He argued that the violence of the oppressed could not be judged by the same standards as the violence of oppressors, that Western intellectuals criticizing Soviet repression were betraying the working class. That commitment required accepting the logic of revolution, including its violence, its terror, its willingness to sacrifice present human beings for future liberation. Camus could not accept this, not because he defended capitalism or colonialism, not because he was blind to injustice or indifferent to suffering, but because he had learned from the French Revolution, from the Russian Revolution, from watching revolutionary movements across the 20th century, that this logic always led to the same place, to camps, to purges, to the murder of actual human beings in the name of abstract principles. He wrote The Rebel partly as a response to this disagreement, an attempt to articulate a politics that could oppose injustice without becoming unjust, that could fight for human dignity without claiming perfect knowledge of what dignity required. Sartre did not review the book himself. He had one of his associates, Francis Janssen, write the review for his journal Les Temps Modernes. The review was brutal, dismissive. It accused Camus of bourgeois moralism, of caring more about philosophical purity than about actual liberation, of abandoning the working class, of refusing to make the hard choices that real political commitment required. Camus wrote a response, not to Janssen but to Sartre directly, addressing him as Monsieur le Directeur rather than by name, a formal coldness that signalled the friendship was already over. He defended his position, accused Sartre of intellectual dishonesty, of justifying tyranny in the name of fighting tyranny, of becoming the kind of ideologue who could rationalize any means in pursuit of supposedly noble ends, Sartre replied, also brutally, accusing Camus of self-righteousness, of philosophical conservatism, of retreating from genuine political engagement into abstract moral posturing. The friendship ended in public in the pages of journals, with each man using the intellectual weapons they had spent years sharpening on each other, and Camus found himself alone. The left saw him as a traitor, someone who had abandoned the cause, who cared more about moral abstractions than about the concrete struggle for liberation. The right saw him as dangerous, as someone undermining traditional values and social order. He belonged to no camp, had no movement, no ideological home. This isolation was not comfortable. Humans are social creatures. Intellectuals especially crave communities of thought, people who share their concerns, speak their language, validate their insights. Camus had none of this. But he had something else, something harder to maintain but more valuable. He had independence, the freedom to say what seemed true without worrying about whether it served a particular political project, the ability to criticize all sides without pledging allegiance to any, the capacity to think for himself, even when thinking for himself meant standing alone. This is what intellectuals are supposed to do, not become propagandists for movements, not subordinate truth to political expediency, not justify violence because it serves the right cause, but think, question, refuse easy answers, maintain critical distance even from, especially from, ideas and movements they care about. Sartre became a fellow traveller of communism, defending the Soviet Union even as evidence of its crimes mounted, arguing that Western intellectuals had no right to criticize revolutionary movements, that engagement meant choosing sides and accepting the logic of your chosen side. He became the kind of committed intellectual who subordinated independent judgment to political solidarity. Camus refused this. He insisted that intellectuals had a responsibility to maintain their independence, to speak truth to power on all sides, to refuse to become servants of any ideology or movement. This made him unpopular, isolated, often misunderstood. People accused him of fence-sitting, of being unable to make hard choices, of caring more about his own moral purity than about actual political outcomes. But he was not sitting on fences. He was refusing to accept that the choice was binary, that you had to choose between supporting oppression or supporting revolutionary violence, that there was no third path. He insisted there was a third path, the path of rebellion within limits, of fighting injustice without claiming perfect knowledge of justice, of maintaining moral constraints even when those constraints made political success more difficult. This path was harder than Sartre's, darker, more uncertain. It offered no guarantees, no assurance that history was on your side, no community of believers who would validate your choices. It required standing alone, thinking independently, accepting that you might be wrong while still acting on what seemed right. This is the loneliness of genuine intellectual independence, not the loneliness of exile or rejection, though Camus experienced both, but the deeper loneliness of refusing to surrender your judgment to collective movements, ideological certainties, political tribes. The break with Sartre crystallized something Camus had been learning his entire life, that the most important intellectual work often happens in isolation, that popular movements, even movements for justice, can become tyrannical if they lose their capacity for self-criticism, that the role of the intellectual is not to lead revolutions but to question them, not because revolutions are always wrong, but because revolutionary certainty is dangerous, because the logic that justifies unlimited violence in pursuit of perfect society always leads to camps and purges and the sacrifice of actual human beings for abstract futures. Sartre believed engagement meant commitment, choosing a side and defending it even when it did uncomfortable things. Camus believed engagement meant maintaining critical independence, refusing to become anyone's propagandist, including your own movements. Both men claimed to care about human freedom, but Sartre was willing to justify present unfreedom for the sake of future liberation. Camus insisted that means and ends could not be separated, that the methods you used shaped the results you achieved, that you could not create freedom through systematic oppression. This was not abstract philosophy. This was lived political reality. Sartre's position led him to minimize or excuse Soviet crimes, to argue that Western intellectuals should not criticize revolutionary violence because criticism served imperialism. Camus's position led him to oppose all forms of tyranny, whether capitalist or communist, colonial or revolutionary, and this made him homeless, without a clear political identity, unable to fit comfortably into any camp. But it also made him right. History vindicated Camus more than Sartre. The revolutionary movements Sartre defended often created new forms of oppression. The logic he embraced that ends justify means, that historical necessity absolves moral responsibility, led to exactly the catastrophes Camus warned against. But Camus did not live to see this vindication. He died in 1960, still isolated, still misunderstood, still defending a position that seemed naive to many of his contemporaries. The break with Sartre hurt him, not just politically, but personally. They had been friends, real friends, not just intellectual allies. And now that friendship was gone, destroyed not by betrayal or cruelty, but by irreconcilable differences about what it meant to think responsibly in a world of injustice and violence. Some friendships cannot survive certain disagreements. Some ideas matter more than affection. Some principles cannot be compromised without losing yourself. Camus chose his principles over the friendship, over political belonging, over the comfort of ideological certainty. He chose independence, critical thinking, the difficult middle ground between passive acceptance and revolutionary fanaticism, and he paid for this choice with isolation, but isolation was the price of integrity. The cost of refusing to surrender judgment to collective movements or ideological certainties. He stood alone, thinking independently, writing honestly, refusing to become anyone's propagandist. This is what genuine intellectual work requires, not the ability to choose the right side, but the courage to question all sides. To think for yourself, even when thinking for yourself, means standing in the cold. The break with Sartre marked the end of easy belonging, the end of intellectual partnership, the end of the comfort that comes from sharing your convictions with others. But it also marked the beginning of something else. The freedom to think without constraint, to write without worrying about serving a political project, to maintain critical independence, even when independence meant loneliness. Camus walked this path until the end, never joining, never pledging allegiance, never surrendering the hard-won freedom to think for himself. And in that walking difficult, lonely, uncertain, he showed what intellectual integrity actually requires. Not brilliance, not eloquence, not even being right about everything, but the willingness to stand alone, when standing alone is what honesty demands. Theatre was where Camus felt most alive, not writing about it, not theorizing, actually doing it, directing actors, shaping performances, watching bodies tell stories that philosophy could only point toward. He founded a theatre company in Algeria when he was 22, poor, sick with tuberculosis, uncertain about his future, but certain about this, that something true happened when human beings stood on a stage and inhabited other lives. Not pretended, inhabited. There is a difference. Pretending is performance without presence, going through motions, delivering lines, playing a role while remaining fundamentally separate from it. Inhabiting is something else. It is bringing your entire consciousness into contact with another way of being, letting your body teach you what the character knows, discovering truths through gesture that you could never reach through thinking. Camus believed the body knew things the mind had not yet articulated. That consciousness was not just in your head, but distributed through your entire physical being, that you could learn philosophy through acting in ways that reading could never teach. This was not abstract theory, this was lived experience. When he directed actors, he did not give them psychological explanations or intellectual frameworks. He worked with their bodies, their breath, their physical presence. Stand here, move slower, let your weight drop, feel the ground beneath you. The body's wisdom preceded language, preceded argument. preceded the careful constructions of philosophy. This is why theatre mattered to him more than many people understood. It was not entertainment, not even art in the conventional sense. It was a laboratory for exploring what it meant to be human, a space where you could try on different ways of existing, test different responses to absurdity, discover through embodiment what you could never discover through abstraction. When an actor truly inhabits a role, something strange happens. They remain themselves, their own body, their own consciousness, their own lived experience, but simultaneously they become someone else. They access patterns of being that are not naturally theirs, and in that doubling, that simultaneous self and other, they discover something about the constructed nature of all identity. You are not a fixed thing. You are a performance. You have become so habituated to that you mistake it for nature. And if you can inhabit one way of being on stage, you can potentially inhabit others in life. This is what Camus meant when he talked about the actor as absurd hero. The actor knows their performance is temporary, knows the character they inhabit is not real, knows that when the play ends, they will return to their ordinary life, yet they commit fully anyway. They give themselves completely to the illusion while remaining aware it is illusion. This is exactly the structure of absurd engagement. Living fully within circumstances you know are temporary, committing to meanings you know are not guaranteed, inhabiting your life with complete presence while remaining aware that this life is not the only possible life you could have lived. The actor's face becomes a metaphor for consciousness itself. You are always performing, always constructing a self through repeated actions, gestures, ways of speaking, always inhabiting a role, worker, parent, lover, friend, that feels natural only because you have practiced it so long. But underneath the performance there is the performer, the consciousness that watches itself perform, the awareness that remains even when the role changes. This is not falseness. This is the human condition. We are simultaneously ourselves and our own creation, authentic and performed, natural and constructed. The mistake is thinking you must choose between these, that you must be either completely genuine or completely artificial. Camus says, you are always both, and recognizing this does not make you less real. It makes you more honest about the kind of reality you actually possess. Theatre also taught him about solidarity. A play requires collaboration, actors depending on each other, everyone holding their part of the collective effort. The performance only works when people show up for each other. This became his model for how human beings could live together without requiring shared beliefs about ultimate meaning. You do not need to agree about God or purpose or cosmic justice to work together on a common project. You need only to commit to the immediate task, to show up for your scene partners, to honor the ensemble. This is ethics without metaphysics, solidarity without ideology. Human connection based not on shared doctrine, but on shared practice. The Mediterranean taught him this too. The beach where boys from different backgrounds played soccer together, where French and Arab children swam in the same water, where the sun shone on everyone without asking about their beliefs, but theatre made it conscious, made it deliberate, made it a choice rather than an accident of geography. In his final years, when he felt increasingly isolated politically, when his break with Sartre left him without intellectual community, Camus returned to theatre. He adapted Dostoevsky, directed Faulkner, worked with actors in rehearsal rooms where the questions that mattered were practical rather than ideological. How do you enter? Where do you look? What is your intention in this moment? These questions grounded him, reminded him that philosophy was not just about argument, but about how you moved through the world, how you inhabited your body, how you related to other bodies sharing space with you. The face an actor wears on stage is not a mask hiding the real person. It is another face the person actually has, another possibility within them made visible. And your everyday face, the one you think of as your real face, is also a performance you have learned so well you no longer notice you're performing it. This recognition could be depressing, could make everything feel false and empty, but Camus found it liberating. If you're always performing, then you can choose your performance, can try new gestures, can experiment with different ways of being, can refuse the scripts others have written for you and write your own, not from scratch. You are still constrained by your body, your history, your circumstances. An actor cannot simply decide to fly, but within constraints there is freedom, room to choose, space to become something other than what habit has made you. Theatre was Camus's reminder that philosophy had to remain connected to bodies, to breath, to physical presence, to the immediate reality of human beings existing in time and space. Ideas that could not be embodied were not fully real. Truths that could not be performed were only partially true. This is why he never became a pure philosopher, why he kept writing novels and plays, why he returned again and again to the stage. Because the stage was where philosophy became flesh, where abstract concepts transformed into lived experience, where you could test whether your ideas actually worked when inhabited by breathing, moving, feeling human beings. The actor's face taught him this. You do not think your way into new ways of being. You live your way into new ways of thinking. Camus died with an unfinished manuscript in his briefcase, The First Man, his attempt to return to the beginning, to understand where he came from, to write about his childhood in Algeria with the honesty he had spent his entire career developing. The manuscript was damaged in the car crash that killed him, pages scattered, paragraphs smeared, but enough survived to show what he was reaching for. Not memoir in the conventional sense, not autobiography, something stranger and more ambitious. An attempt to write about poverty, about childhood, about the formation of consciousness in circumstances that provided no language for consciousness. His mother could not read, could barely speak. Deafness isolated her. Poverty crushed her. She existed in a world of physical labor and immediate survival that had no room for reflection or introspection. Yet she was real, fully real, as real as any philosopher who had ever written about the human condition, and Camus wanted to capture this reality, to show that consciousness was not the special possession of educated people. That dignity existed in places philosophy usually ignored. The manuscript begins with a boy visiting his father's grave, a father he never knew, killed in the war when the boy was still an infant. The boy Jacques, but also Albert, the autobiography barely disguised, stands at the grave and realizes he is now older than his father ever got to be. This inversion haunts the book, the son outliving the father, the child becoming older than his origin. It suggests something about history, about Algeria, about the relationship between past and future. You cannot remain a child forever. You cannot stay in your origin. Eventually you become older than the stories that made you. And then what? Algeria was Camus's origin, the Mediterranean light, the poverty, the mix of French and Arab and Berber cultures, the beach where he learned that the body could teach philosophy. But Algeria was also slipping away, becoming something he could no longer recognize. The war for independence was fracturing the world he had known. Violence on all sides, terror and counter-terror. The comfortable certainties of his childhood revealing themselves as built on injustice. He could not support colonialism, but he could not support the violence of the independence movement either. His mother still lived in Algiers. She could become collateral damage in someone's revolution. This was not abstract political theory. This was his actual life, his actual mother, the actual place where he had learned to think and feel and see, and he was caught, unable to choose between opposing injustices, unable to find a position that honored both his love for the place and his recognition of its fundamental unfairness. The First Man was his attempt to understand how he had arrived at this impossible position. How does a poor boy from the slums of Algiers become a famous French intellectual? What is preserved in that transformation? What is lost? The manuscript moves between past and present, between the child, Jacques, experiencing the world directly, and the adult trying to understand what that experience meant. There is a teacher, Monsieur Bernard. He sees something in the boy, potential that poverty would normally crush. He fights to get Jacques a scholarship to the lycée, to give him access to education that could lift him out of his circumstances. This teacher appears in Camus's work again and again. The person who recognizes you before you recognize yourself, who believes in your possibility when no one else, including you, sees it. Camus dedicated his Nobel Prize speech to this teacher, sent him a copy of his acceptance address, said, "This is yours as much as mine, because without that intervention, without that recognition, there is no education, no books, no philosophy, no career, just poverty reproducing itself generation after generation. But the transformation came with a cost. Education alienated him from his origin, gave him language his mother could not understand, created distance between who he had been and who he was becoming. He could not go home completely, could not unknow what he had learned, could not return to the simplicity of his childhood world. This is the price of consciousness, of education, of ascending from one class to another. You gain access to new worlds, but you lose the ability to fully inhabit your first world. You become a stranger to your origin, while never quite belonging to your destination. The manuscript also contains long passages about the land itself, the quality of light, the smell of earth after rain, the taste of fruit, the feeling of sun on skin. These are not decorative details. These are the foundations of Camus's philosophy, the sensory experiences that taught him presence before he had words for presence, that showed him immediacy before he could theorize about it. Algeria was not just a place, it was the original text, the first lesson, the ground from which everything else grew. And watching it tear itself apart in violence, watching both sides claim total justice and commit brutal acts, was watching his origin betray itself. The manuscript breaks off mid-sentence. Literally, Camus died before finishing the thought. We do not know how he intended to resolve the tensions he was exploring, whether he would have found a way to reconcile his love for Algeria with his opposition to its political structures, whether he could have written a way forward that honoured both the place and the people it had oppressed. The car crash ended, the sentence ended, the book ended the life, and the unfinished manuscript became a kind of metaphor for Algeria itself, for any origin that cannot be fully recovered or completely abandoned, for the impossibility of return and the necessity of remembering. You cannot go back, the first world is lost, the child you were does not exist anymore. But you carry that origin inside you, the light, the poverty, the mother who could not speak but was somehow the source of everything worth saying. Camus spent his life trying to honour this paradox, to remain faithful to his Mediterranean origins, while building a philosophy that could speak to anyone, anywhere, to preserve the particular while reaching for the universal. The First Man was his final attempt to show how this was possible, to write about poverty without sentimentalizing it, to capture his mother's reality without making her symbolic, to return to the beginning without pretending the journey between then and now had not changed him. The manuscript survived the crash, damaged but legible, like memory itself, like origin stories always are, partial, fragmented, true in ways that completeness could never be. He was going back to the first thing, the source, the ground, not to escape the present, but to understand how the present became possible, to see what was preserved and what was sacrificed in becoming who he became. And the car crash, sudden, violent, absurd, cut this return short, left the question unresolved, the sentence unfinished, the journey back incomplete, which is perhaps the only honest way it could have ended. Because you never fully reach your origin. You circle it, you write toward it, you try to capture what it meant. But it remains always slightly beyond reach, always more than your words can hold, always the place you came from, but can no longer fully inhabit. The first man, the original ground, the beginning that stays beginning, even after everything else has changed. We return to the boulder, because everything Camus wrote circles back to this image. The man pushing the rock up the mountain, watching it roll back down, beginning again. This is not punishment metaphor. This is description. You wake up, you work, you eat, you sleep, you wake up again. The same cycle, the same tasks, the same temporary victories followed by inevitable return to starting position. Your body needs feeding every day. Your relationships need maintenance. Your work is never finished. Your house gets dirty again. Your problems recur in new forms. From one angle, this is tragedy, endless futility, cosmic joke. The universe demonstrating with perfect clarity that nothing you do will last. But Camus asks us to imagine Sisyphus happy. Not happy because he has forgotten his situation. Not happy because he believes the gods will relent. Not happy because he has constructed some elaborate philosophical justification that makes his labor meaningful. Happy because he has achieved something rarer and harder than success. He has achieved lucidity without despair. He sees his situation clearly, knows exactly what awaits him. No illusions about ultimate victory. No false hope that this time the boulder will stay at the top. Just honest recognition of the permanent structure of his existence. And within that recognition, not despite it, but within it, he has found a way to be fully present, fully himself, fully engaged. This is the achievement Camus spent his entire life articulating: how to live without guarantees, how to create meaning without requiring cosmic validation, how to commit to things that will not last forever precisely because they will not last forever. The happiness Camus imagines for Sisyphus is not the happiness of getting what you want. It is the happiness of being completely honest about what you have. No pretense, no performance for invisible audiences, no waiting for external validation. Just the immediate reality of muscle straining, boulder moving, mountain being climbed. The full presence of someone who has stopped asking whether his labor matters and started mattering through his labor. This is what the walk back down the mountain represents. The pause between efforts, the moment of consciousness, the breath between one task and its repetition. In this moment, Sisyphus is superior to his rock, not because he can escape it, but because he can be aware of it in ways the rock cannot be aware of anything. Consciousness, even condemned consciousness, has a dignity that objects lack, and this dignity does not depend on circumstances being good. It depends on maintaining full presence within whatever circumstances actually exist. You are Sisyphus. Every morning you wake up to responsibilities you did not choose but cannot abandon. Every day you go to work knowing retirement is decades away. Every time you clean, knowing mess will return. Every moment you love someone knowing death will eventually separate you. You can resent this, can rage against the structure of existence, can demand that life be other than it is. Or you can do what Sisyphus has learnt to do. Accept what is true. Stop fighting the basic rhythm of existence. Find satisfaction not in permanent achievement, but in quality of engagement. The boulder will roll back down. This is not failure. This is the structure of the game. And once you accept the structure, you are free to play fully within it, free to push with complete effort, free to feel your strength, free to appreciate the view from the summit, however briefly, free to walk back down with dignity intact. This is what Camus means by revolt, not violent rebellion against circumstances, not angry protest against the universe, but the quiet refusal to be defeated by circumstances, the insistence on maintaining human dignity, regardless of what cosmic indifference or physical reality or historical forces try to impose. Revolt says, I cannot control whether my life matters ultimately, but I can control whether I live it fully while I have it. I cannot prevent death from erasing my accomplishments, but I can create accomplishments worth erasing. I cannot make the universe care about me, but I can care about myself, about others, about beauty and truth and justice, and that caring is its own justification. One must imagine Sisyphus happy, not as consolation, not as false hope, but as honest description of what becomes possible when you stop waiting for life to be other than it is, when you stop demanding guarantees before you commit, when you stop requiring cosmic purpose before you create human purpose, when you accept that you are temporary consciousness on a temporary planet and decide that temporary is enough. The scorn Sisyphus might feel for the gods who condemned him transforms into something else, not forgiveness, they do not deserve forgiveness, but indifference. They are no longer relevant to his experience. They condemned him, but they cannot touch what he has become through his condemnation. He has learned to find satisfaction in the pushing itself, in the full use of his body and consciousness, in the complete engagement with the task before him. The gods meant this as punishment. He has transformed it into his project, his choice, his life. This is the ultimate revolt, not escaping your circumstances, but becoming so fully yourself within your circumstances that circumstances no longer determine the quality of your existence. The happiness Camus imagines is hard happiness, dark happiness, happiness earned through complete honesty about the worst truths. It is not the happiness of achievement or success, not the happiness of comfort or security, not the happiness of meaning finally revealed. It is the happiness of full presence, of consciousness that has stopped waiting and started living, of someone who has made peace not with injustice or suffering, but with the fact that they exist in a universe that contains both, and that existing in such a universe is still better than not existing at all. This is the final yes hidden inside the no, the affirmation hidden inside the refusal. No to false hope, yes to honest engagement, no to guaranteed meaning, yes to created meaning, no to cosmic purpose, yes to human purpose, no to permanent solutions, yes to temporary efforts. The boulder rolls back down, Sisyphus walks back down, the cycle begins again. And somewhere in that beginning again, in the choice to continue, despite full knowledge of futility, there is something that transcends futility. There is consciousness choosing itself, life affirming itself, the strange human capacity to find joy in circumstances that would seem to preclude joy. One must imagine Sisyphus happy, because if he can be happy, condemned to eternal futile labor, stripped of everything that people usually think makes life worth living, then happiness must be something other than we thought. Not a reward for good circumstances, but a quality of response to any circumstances, not getting what you want, but being fully present with what you have, not achieving permanent victory, but engaging completely with temporary efforts. The scorn becomes joy, the burden becomes freedom, the punishment becomes life itself, and life itself absurd, temporary, unexplained is enough. January 4th, 1960. Albert Camus is riding in a car driven by his publisher Michel Gallimard. They are returning to Paris from the south of France. Camus's wife and children took the train. He was supposed to take the train too, had a ticket in his pocket. But Gallimard offered him a ride, the chance to discuss work, to see the countryside. So he got in the car. On a straight road near the village of Villebleven, the car left the road, hit a tree. Camus died instantly, 46 years old, at the height of his powers, the Nobel Prize still new, the first man manuscript in his briefcase, an unused train ticket in his pocket. If ever there was an absurd death, this was it, random, meaningless. The kind of accident that serves no purpose, teaches no lesson, fits into no narrative. A man who had spent his entire life thinking about the absurd, killed absurdly. The irony was not lost on anyone. Some called it cosmic joke, others called it tragic proof of his philosophy. A few said it was almost too perfect, like the universe itself had been reading his books. But Camus would have rejected all these interpretations. Death is not ironic, not symbolic, not meaningful in any cosmic sense. Death is simply what happens to conscious beings. The period at the end of the sentence, the final roll of Sisyphus's boulder. What made this death absurd was not that it proved anything about the universe, but that it demonstrated exactly what Camus had always said. We do not control our circumstances. We only control our response to them. And Camus had no chance to respond to this circumstance. One moment alive, next moment not. No time for final thoughts or last words. No opportunity to face death with the lucidity he had recommended. Just the sudden violence of metal and tree and physics. This is how death usually comes. Not with time to prepare, not with opportunity for meaningful last acts. Just arrival, sudden or gradual, but always final. The manuscript survived, damaged but legible. His attempt to return to origins interrupted mid-sentence. This incompleteness became its own kind of statement. You do not get to finish your thoughts. You do not get to tie up all loose ends. Life does not wait for you to achieve closure before it ends. You are mid-sentence when it happens, mid-project, mid-life. And the universe does not care that you had more to say. Camus left behind a body of work that had already changed how people thought about meaning, freedom, rebellion, solidarity. He left behind ideas that would continue to speak long after his death. That would help people face their own absurd situations with more honesty and less despair. But he also left behind an unfinished manuscript, unresolved political questions, a family suddenly without father and husband, friends who never got to reconcile after bitter breaks. Death does not wait for you to complete your arc. It arrives when it arrives. This is the final lesson Camus's life teaches. Not through his writing, but through his dying. That consciousness is temporary, that even the most brilliant minds eventually cease. That the body which taught him so much, which grounded his philosophy in immediate experience, eventually fails. And that this failure is not failure in the moral sense, just the basic structure of physical existence. You live, then you do not. Everything between these 2 points is what you make of the time you have. Camus made quite a lot of it, born into poverty, killed by tuberculosis at 17, and surviving, building a philosophy from Mediterranean sun and Algerian beaches, and the simple recognition that life could be beautiful despite being meaningless, fighting in the resistance, writing novels that captured something true about alienation and absurdity, refusing easy political allegiances when everyone demanded you choose sides, standing alone, thinking independently, maintaining integrity even when integrity meant isolation, living fully within circumstances that offered no guarantees, and then suddenly, without warning, on a straight road in good weather, not living anymore. The absurdity is not that he died. Everyone dies. The absurdity is that death comes without regard for whether you are finished, whether your work is complete, whether you have said everything you needed to say. It comes anyway, and this makes every moment before it more precious, not less, more. Because if Camus had known that morning would be his last, what would he have done differently? Probably nothing. He was already living the way he recommended, fully present, engaged with work and relationships, not waiting for ultimate answers before committing to immediate projects. The unused train ticket in his pocket becomes a strange kind of symbol, not of fate or destiny. Camus would reject those concepts, but of contingency. Small choices, random circumstances, the difference between taking the train and taking the car, between arriving safely in Paris and dying on a country road. We tell ourselves stories about why things happen, but sometimes things just happen. Car hits tree, consciousness ends. The universe continues exactly as it did before. This is the absurd. This is what Camus spent his life trying to help us face without flinching. Not the fact of death itself, but the fact that death is not meaningful, not purposeful, not part of some larger plan, just the edge of consciousness, the limit of experience, the final demonstration that we are temporary beings who must create whatever meaning our lives will have because meaning will not be provided from outside. Camus's death does not prove his philosophy, does not validate it, does not make it more true or less true. It simply demonstrates what he always said: you do not get to choose when the boulder stops rolling. You only get to choose how you push it while you can, and he pushed it, with full effort, with complete presence, with the lucidity he spent his life developing. He pushed it until he could not push anymore, and then the pushing stopped. What remains is the work, the ideas, the reminder that it is possible to live without guarantees, to create meaning in meaningless universe, to rebel against absurdity without becoming absurd yourself, to be Sisyphus, to push the boulder, to walk back down the mountain, to begin again, and to find in that beginning again, in the choice to continue despite full knowledge of futility, something that feels like happiness. Not the happiness of achievement, but the happiness of full engagement. Complete presence, honest living. The car hit the tree, the consciousness ended, the work remained, and the work says, you are alive right now. This moment, this one actual moment, stop waiting for it to mean something it will never mean. Stop demanding guarantees you will never receive. Stop postponing engagement until circumstances improve. You are here. The sun is shining or not shining. Your boulder is waiting. Your mountain is before you. Push it, not because it will stay at the top, but because pushing is what consciousness does, how it manifests, how it proves it exists. Push it fully. honestly without illusions or despair, and when you walk back down to begin again, walk with the strange dignity of someone who has learned this impossible truth, that temporary can be enough, that meaningless can be beautiful, that absurd can be livable. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. One must imagine Camus in the final seconds before the car hit the tree, in the final moment of consciousness, still fully himself, still present, still engaged, not afraid, not regretful, not incomplete, just alive until he was not. And that being alive, fully, honestly, without guarantees, is everything.